Rick was driving his taxi through the empty streets of a small town in Ohio, wrapping up a long and exhausting night shift. The sky was covered in dark clouds, and a cold wind swept dry leaves across the sidewalk. Street lights flickered and dimmed one by one, leaving behind an eerie silence. Just as he was about to head home, a sudden notification lit up his phone screen. A new ride request. The pickup address was on the outskirts of town, near an old neighborhood called Sunset Hollow, a place surrounded by eerie local legends. Rick hesitated. He usually avoided that area, especially this late at night. But for some reason, his finger tapped accept without thinking. His car turned onto a narrow road, lined with towering trees on both sides. Their branches looked like bony arms, reaching into the darkness. His headlights were the only light cutting through the fog. When Rick arrived at the pickup location, he saw someone standing beneath an old street lamp. The light flickered weakly, casting the figure in shadow. They wore a long coat and a dark hat, standing completely still, head bowed. No bag, no phone in hand, just an unsettling stillness. Rick unlocked the back door automatically. The figure entered the taxi silently. No sound of footsteps, no sound of the door closing. Moments later, the GPS lit up on its own, displaying the destination: Hollowgate Cemetery front gate. Rick stared at the screen. His heart began to pound. He almost cancelled the ride, but the car was already moving, as if his hands were no longer his own. The taxi drove deeper into the night, toward a place no one should be visiting at this hour. The taxi moved slowly down the narrow road, surrounded by old trees fading into the fog. Inside the car, the atmosphere began to shift. The air, once cold, now felt freezing. Rick could see his breath, even though the heater was still on. The windows fogged up suddenly, despite the outside not being cold enough for that. Rick glanced at the rearview mirror. His passenger sat motionless, head down, face still hidden. The dashboard lights began to flicker, then shut off completely. The taxi radio crackled for a moment, then fell silent as if the power had been cut. The digital clock blinked 12 o'clock and stayed frozen on that time. Rick tried to speak, but his throat felt tight, as though the air itself refused to carry his voice. Everything felt slow. Time itself seemed to stop as the taxi kept moving forward. Outside, the fog grew thicker, until the road ahead was barely visible. Only the sound of his own heartbeat reminded him he was still there. Suddenly, a light emerged in the distance. A large iron gate came into view, rusted and overgrown. Through the haze and trees, faint letters could be seen: Hollowgate Cemetery. Rick swallowed hard. That was their destination. And the passenger in the back still hadn't made a single sound. The taxi slowed to a stop in front of a rusted gate, with faded letters barely visible: Hollowgate Cemetery. Fog rolled thick around the car, as if the air was being pulled into the ground. Tall trees loomed like silent guardians, and the wind had completely died. Rick took a deep breath, then turned around to tell the passenger they had arrived. But the back seat was empty. No one was there. The seatbelt lay neatly in place. The doors had never opened. No sound, no movement. The passenger was gone, vanished without a trace. Rick froze in place. His hands began to tremble as he opened the door and stepped outside. The air was colder than before, like the life had been drained from the world. He turned on his phone flashlight, shining it around, searching for any sign of where the person had gone. But the damp ground showed nothing. No footprints. No signs of anyone leaving the vehicle. Only silence. Then, from beyond the cemetery gate, a faint whisper echoed through the air. Soft, unclear, but frighteningly close. Rick stepped back slowly, his heart pounding, a cold sweat forming down his back. The whisper suddenly stopped, and the cemetery fell silent once more, as if nothing had ever happened there at all. The next morning, Rick arrived at the taxi office earlier than usual. His face was pale. His eyes were heavy from a sleepless night. He told them everything about the strange passenger and how they vanished in front of the cemetery. Some co-workers laughed, thinking it was just a nightmare from a tired driver. But Rick insisted. He asked the supervisor to check the trip logs from last night. A few minutes later, everyone went silent. There was no record of the ride. No booking from Sunset Hollow. No destination to Hollowgate Cemetery. The system showed that Rick had driven alone. No passenger. No stop. Nothing. But there was one disturbing detail. When the supervisor checked the back seat of Rick's taxi, they found something they couldn't explain. The seat was still warm. Warm. As if someone had been sitting there for hours. No belongings. No trace. Just warmth. Rick stood still. There was nothing more he could say. Later that night, while Rick was on break, a new ride request appeared on his phone. Same pickup location. Same time. No name listed. Rick stared at the screen. He didn't dare touch it. From that day on, he swore he would never again pick up anyone heading toward the cemetery. But sometimes, on cold, quiet nights, he still feels the weight of someone sitting silently in the back seat, watching him, waiting for one more ride back to the place they should never have left.